Hey guys, it's Amber from NotableInk.com, and I'm so excited to share Alex Syberia Designs' May release. In addition to her trademark florals, she also has Japanese Kokeshi doll stamp sets this time around. So be sure to stay tuned to the end because I have a bonus card at the end featuring one of those dolls. Today I'm using Sweet Gardenia digital stamp set, and you can see that I've already gotten started and set up my image and started some coloring. Here are the Copic colors that I'm going to use. All the ones with numbers are listed for you. I'll have them listed in my blog post as well, and you can find that link as well as all of the supplies listed down below. Be sure to subscribe while you're down there. I'll start with one of the petals, and I'm going to use Shock Pink, which is RV04. Everything in me when I saw this image said shock pink. This is a color that is not used very often from my stash. It's practically neon pink. So I had a lot of fun. You can see me kind of swatching the colors down below, trying to figure out what colors might blend with it. And there aren't really colors in its family that are going to blend perfectly. So I chose outside of that color family and didn't expect to get a totally smooth blend, so I'm coloring in a way that is going to leave some streaks and leave some highlights because I'm not going to get that super smooth blend with the colors that I'm using. Hopefully that makes sense. So basically I lay down a layer of shock pink over the full petal, and then I start coming in with my midtones. Now my midtones are going to be the RV66 and RV04. Once I have a little bit of that down, I'm going to bring in my darkest color, which is the RV69, and then I start bringing in the midtones again. So you can see that some of the streaks are maybe a little more distinct than others, and when I want to have a really blended purple, so here's the RV04, I already have a lot of ink on my paper at this point. So then I can get more of a soft blended look to that RV04 because the paper is so saturated. When you're thinking about this, it's similar to, so if I were to take my RV04 directly to the paper without any other ink on it, it's going to be a sharp line. If I take it to paper with there's already a lot of ink on it, then it's going to be more blended, kind of fuzzier edges, similar to when you're watercoloring, a wet on dry technique versus a wet on wet technique. Wet on dry, you're going to be able to get sharp lines and detail. Wet on wet, it's going to blend and the colors are going to kind of bleed out. So you can kind of think of it that way when you're Copic coloring. How do you want your finished lines to appear, your finished strokes to appear? Do you want them to be super blended, or do you need a sharp look? Sometimes, like you can see in these shadows that I just put in, sometimes I want a really sharp shadow and a lot of depth. And in that case, I may not blend it out with a lighter color. Moving on to the stem, and then I'll go back to a few more petals for you guys. So I'm filling in the stem with YG03 completely, the whole thing. And then I'm going to come in with YG13. Actually, no, I'm going to come in with my darkest color, the YG67. That's my darkest tone, and I'm just adding small flicks of it here and there where some of the creases of the stem and kind of knots on the stem are going to overlap and cast a shadow. And then I'm going to blend that out with my midtone, which is the YG13. And then I'll come back in with my darkest color to just deepen up those shadows and make sure that there's enough contrast. So when I print digital images, I set it up in Photoshop and I set up my page to be 8.5 by 5.5, which is a half sheet of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White. And then I have some guidelines that I put in that are, a 4.25 by 5.5 inch card panel size, so that I have an idea of how large the images are going to come out. And then because Alex supplies us with images that have a white fill, but the background is transparent, I was able to drop in this digital paper behind the image and add a sentiment that was white before printing. So here I'll do another petal for you guys. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fill it in with the RV04, which is the Shock Pink, and then I'll come in with my darkest color first, and then I'll come in with some of the midtones. Now, I don't always color light to dark or dark to light. I color based on the situation, and by the situation I mean For me, I'm mostly coloring flowers. I don't really do too much characters, but if the area that I'm coloring is large, like some of these petals are really huge, I will come in with the lightest color first and then bring in my darkest tones. If I'm doing smaller petals or a smaller flower, I might start with my darkest color and then blend out to my lightest color. The reason for that is when you have a smaller space, if you continue to add more and more color, you're more likely to get those colors to bleed outside the lines. So I color more situationally versus, I'm stuck with light to dark or dark to light. I kind of mix it up depending on the situation. And I think that's a good way to go because it's not always going to be the same situation. So I'm bringing in some shadows here, and I do like, so if you'll notice on my petals, I think the petals that look best are the ones that have shadow coming down from the tip of the petal and then also coming up from the base. If you can highlight some of those wrinkles in the petals, then it's going to have more dimension to it and look a little bit more realistic. So the way that I shade my flowers is always the same formula. I always bring in shadow at the base of the petal, shadow where the petals overlap each other and cast a shadow, and shadows where there are creases or wrinkles in the petals. And that's kind of how you get that flowy, crinkly look going on. So I'm just blending out those midtones with the midtones rather. And when you're adding your shadow, like you can see that the petal is folded over there. What you want to try and avoid is adding like an outline of a shadow. So I don't want to add that darkest color all the way around the fold of that petal where the tip just folds over, because that's going to look more like an outline than it is a casted shadow. You just want to do small areas here and there just to suggest that there's a shadow that goes all around, but not outline it. Hopefully that makes sense. We're just about at the end of the coloring portion here, and I did end up coloring in that sentiment down below white as well. So what I did to make the sentiment in the digital image was I used a font that was white, so I made the font white, and then I put a stroke around it, so that's like an outline around the font, and I made that, I think it was either 4 or 5 pixels, I made that black just so that it would stand out a little bit more. But having the sentiment be white means that I can color it in any color that I want that's actually going to match my flower. It would be nearly impossible to get my printer to print that same color. So here's a close-up and you can see all of those strokes that I've left in there. So it's not a completely blended project. You can see all of the different colors and all of the different flicks of the Copics, and I really like that style of coloring. As a bonus, I watercolored one of the Japanese Kokeshi dolls, and I free-handed this bamboo background in the back. And although I did film this, the footage did not turn out well. The lighting was so bad, you guys, you couldn't even see what was happening. So I won't be sharing the video on this, but I did want to share the project with you because I really love how it turned out. I'll list the supplies that I used for this card in my blog post in case you want to try one of these little dolls as well. And I'll also have a link to Alex's shop down below in the comments. So be sure to check out her full release. There are amazing florals and 2 more dolls in this release. Thanks so much for joining me today. Be sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more inspiration.